How does a playwright map the invisible internal state of a character's mind so an audience can follow along? In Elizabethan England, William Shakespeare solved this with the soliloquy. The soliloquy relies on reasoned, sequential logic. A character like Hamlet stands alone on stage and explicitly argues his way through an existential crisis, step by step, reason by reason. In Tokugawa-era Japan, traditional theater solved the same problem using an entirely different framework. A play like Chushingura projects internal honor and revenge externally through highly codified rituals, like the precise ceremonies of seppuku, guided by a narrator who explains the context directly to the audience. These two traditions function differently. One relies on internal logic, the other on external ritual. Both depend on predictable, explicitly defined narrative structures. Classical theater requires these artificial frameworks. Without logic or ritual acting as a map, the audience has no way to navigate the character's internal world. Real human trauma rarely follows a clean, logical arc. Extreme psychological distress does not unfold as a neatly reasoned argument or a codified ritual. Modernism sought to shatter these classical tools to reflect that reality. Playwright Samuel Beckett became the architect of this theatrical rupture. In his play, Not I, Beckett strips away every traditional theatrical framework. There is no set, no narrator, and no body. The stage direction calls for nothing but a single disembodied mouth suspended in total darkness. For the entire performance, that mouth delivers a rapid, fragmented stream of consciousness. It is a torrent of words devoid of standard punctuation, meant to physically assault the audience's senses. Traditional literary critics look at this script and see a simulation of cognitive failure. Without acts, scenes, or logical progression, the monologue appears completely devoid of dramatic structure. Traditional critical tools miss the underlying organization of the monologue because they are designed to look for linear progression rather than nonlinear, statistical patterns. To actually read what Beckett wrote, we have to borrow a technique from computer science, natural language processing, or NLP. By running the text of Not I through advanced computational models, the data reveals a mathematically precise, fractal architecture mapping the deterioration of the human mind. Standard rhythm analysis tools are designed for predictable poetry and standard syntax. If you apply them to the chaotic text of Not I, they break down completely. To analyze this text, researchers first used optical character recognition software to digitize the physical script. Next, they cleaned the data, stripping away OCR errors, page numbers, and irrelevant formatting until only the raw, pure dialogue remained. Then came the segmentation phase. They chopped this unbroken block of dialogue into uniform 30-word units. They chose 30 words because, at the frantic pace the mouth speaks, 30 words equals roughly 10 to 15 seconds of stage performance. By mathematically standardizing the text this way, an ephemeral, chaotic live performance is converted into a stable deep learning model trained specifically for nuanced text classification and emotion detection. By feeding the 30-word blocks into this pipeline, the researchers generated a specific emotional profile for every 15-second increment of the play. This pie chart visualizes the distribution of emotions detected across the entire performance. As you can see, the largest slice of the data by far is surprise. When we look back at the text, this checks out. The algorithm picked up on the constant use of interrogatives and exclamations, words like when, who, and oh. The protagonist is trapped in a perpetual state of astonishment and bewilderment. The second largest emotion on the chart is sadness, mathematically confirming the bleak, hopeless undertones we expect from a narrative exploring isolation and despair. The third largest slice is neutrality. The algorithm identified a dense sequence of simple, flat vocabulary. This reflects a protagonist grappling with a deteriorating mind, likely Alzheimer's, attempting to process disjointed memories with minimal emotional expression. The algorithm proves the monologue isn't just screaming. It contains a highly specific, measurable emotional fingerprint belonging to a traumatized, failing memory. NLP also allows us to run quantitative textual analysis. By filtering out common stop words like the or and, we can isolate the exact focal points of the script. This bar chart ranks the top 7 highest frequency words in the play. The data reveals an intense thematic obsession with spatial and temporal distance. The word time appears 17 times. It acts as the central anchor for the protagonist, measuring both the deterioration of her mind and her erratic, disjointed journey through the past. Close behind are the words buzzing, occurring 15 times, and sudden, occurring 10 times. These function as mechanical indicators of abrupt, repressed trauma intruding violently on the mind. By calculating the exact repetition of these specific terms, we see how Beckett meticulously builds a rhythmic internal torment. This repetition entirely replaces the need for a traditional plot. How are these high-frequency words actually distributed across the timeline of the performance? To find out, researchers plotted the exact position of these words from the beginning to the end of the script. This Gantt chart scatter plot displays every occurrence across the horizontal timeline of the play. The algorithm automatically groups the text into 3 distinct major clusters. In the first third of the timeline, dense repetitions of buzzing and time establish the initial emotional tone. Moving into the middle of the timeline, the vocabulary shifts entirely. The focal points become mouth and imagine, tracking a deepening, active engagement with memory. In the final cluster at the end of the timeline, the language is dominated by unresolved queries like "oh" and "what," offering culmination without closure. The algorithm identifies a clear statistical segmentation of the performance, providing an implicit structure that exists entirely within the distribution of vocabulary. The NLP analysis went beyond single words to search for motifs, the longest repetitive subsequences within the dialogue. A motif in this context is a paragraph-length structure of exact wording that recursively loops back on itself later in the play. These recursive patterns are not linguistic accidents. They are evidence of heavy, deliberate, algorithmic repetition by the author. This structural approach matched directly onto the concept of a musical canon, where a primary melody is introduced, imitated, and repeated at precise intervals. The script operates as a fractal musical score. Beckett uses cyclical rhythm, rather than a traditional monologue, to directly simulate the experience of a fragmented psyche. Let's bring this back to the historical frameworks we looked at earlier. Shakespeare built Hamlet's identity through the explicit syntactic logic of the soliloquy. Chushingura built identity through rigid cultural codes and external stylized narration. Beckett bypassed both logic and ritual. He successfully built a character's identity entirely through the hidden statistical geometry of language. The perceived chaos of the monologue masks a rigid mathematical precision. In Not I, language drops its traditional role of simple communication between characters. Instead, language acts as a statistical and musical instrument, weaponized to evoke a profound existential reflection in the audience. Without the analytical lens of natural language processing, this underlying architectural brilliance remains completely invisible. The Modernist descent into theatrical chaos was not a destruction of form, but rather an evolution into a profound, recursive structural precision.